Jane, who lives in a little house in Ireland in the middle of a bog, and just told me that the last time she tried to do a paper airplane, she was thrown out of school. Right? So come and tell us what you think about all of this. Jane Urquhart.
Okay, yeah, that's about perfect. I think I can see people's faces out there vaguely, but not enough to threaten me. That's the really good news. Because I am a low-tech person by all definitions of that phrase. As a matter of fact, the last time that I participated in anything that even resembled this was at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa, where I was supposed to be the artiste, communicating on screen, and I believe hooked up through some kind of computer network that I don't understand, with a guy called Mandelbrot. Does anybody know about him? Yeah, well, you see, I didn't know about him at all. So whoever's out there who knows about Mandelbrot, would understand that it was a little difficult to talk to this man if you don't know anything about him. So God intervened. And what happened instead was that the whole system went down right after we said hello to each other. And I was then able, as I am not today because I'm a good Canadian who follows the rules and doesn't read anything when I'm told not to, I was able then to haul out of my little bag beside me a book. And I said, this is a book. It is bound on the right-hand side. You open it, you can read it, and guess what? It doesn't disappear. So that was kind of a wonderful moment. I had to read from my book for a long time while they fixed all the systems, but by that time, apparently, Mr. Mandelbrot was no longer available, which was a great relief to me. So I'm just a humble scribe, and I do what I do alone in a room, which sounds a little obscene, but it's not. I do what I do alone in a room, and I don't usually have an audience, although when I was a kid, I wanted to be a child star when I grew up. So I do know one tap dancing step, which I can't resist doing right here now. It goes like this. Thank you, thank you. I don't think that quite worked, but I think it was the absence of the tap shoes that perhaps explains that. I'm a humble scribe, and one of the things that I do, what I want to talk to you about today, is the idea of intimacy on the one hand, and I suppose a little bit about distance on the other, since you can't have one without the other, sort of like marriage or love or one of those things. And I guess what we should have probably is the first slide at this point. Or the first two slides, because, can you see that? That looks unfocused to me. Does that look focused to you? Okay, we need it focused. Can we focus it? No, we can't focus it. Okay, see, this is why I love technology. These used to be slides that you put in projectors, and then you had a little focus thing that you move by hand. But now it's all part of the great wide web or something. Anyway, I will describe what you should be seeing there in a minute. But first of all, I want to tell you that this is all as a result of a kind of exercise that I give to creative writing classes, or that I used to give to creative writing classes because I no longer teach them. But when I did, I would send my students outside to draw, first of all draw, and then to write 10 pages about 2 square feet of earth. And they would all look at me as if I was insane, but I knew I was sane because it got them out of the room. But then they would dutifully go off and do what I had suggested. And they came back with some not great drawings, but some fabulous pieces of writing. This exercise was designed by me in order to encourage them to observe the world more closely. Because as a writer, and perhaps this is true for people who aren't writers and people like you, as a writer, it is very important that we know our material, and we have to be intimate with that material. We can't just know it in some kind of broad, vague way. We have to know more about our character than our character knows about themselves. We have to know a whole lot more about the landscape than ever gets into the book. In order to be able to recreate the atmosphere of a landscape, you have to really, really know almost every pebble and every leaf. When I was in Ireland last, I actually live here most of the time. I'm not in Ireland trying to avoid taxes or anything like that. You have to be there for 6 months and 3 days or something to avoid taxes. So I dutifully pay my taxes, for all you tax accountants who are here. When I was in Ireland last, a wonderful old man came up to me and said, "It's a sad state of affairs when the farms get so large that they stop naming the cows." And that's a very good point. And again, it has to do with intimacy. So what I had up here, and the great thing was I used to study art history, so I was going to have a real, this was why I did this, these paired slides. I could sort of pretend to be an art history instructor. I had the Bruegel, The Return of the Herd on one side, and Jana Sturbach's Meat Dress on the other. This is intimacy, this is distance. And not, I'm not making any kind of a qualitative remark about the works of art in particular, because they're both very powerful works of art. But on the one side would be a farmer, if you could see him, bringing home his cows. He would know the name of those cows, regardless of what the fate of those cows might be. My daughter could probably fill you in on that because she's a very committed vegetarian. He nevertheless would have established some kind of relationship with the cows in question. And I don't mean, any kind of pet relationship or anything like that, just a sort of, he would know the difference between the one that was brown and white and the one that was black and white, and they would know him too. And another wonderful old man in Ireland said to me, there are lots of really great old guys in Ireland, once when he said he had to get through a gate to go up and bring his cows down. And I said, well, I was just up there, you should have let me know. And he said, oh no, it's meself they know. So there is this kind of unbelievable connection. And the Sturbach, on the other hand, of course, is all about the commodification of precisely the same thing. It's all about turning it into a consumer product with nothing in between. It's sort of hanging on the garment rack, and you can go and select it, put it on, wear it for a while, and then throw it away. Okay, let's see if the next one's in focus. Uh-oh, oh well. Yeah, well actually, the fact, this is an impressionist painting anyway, so. The other one, alas, is high realism, so we're not really gonna get into that. This is really a device. You didn't know this, but we cooked this up in advance. That would be, could you see it, the 401. And this, could you see it, would be Camille Pissarro, the 401 by Jack Chambers, who is a wonderful realist painter from London. The other one is The Entrance to a Village by Camille Pissarro. And again, I just wanted to show you the difference, but I'll have to do it now with words, you see, which is kind of wonderful. I thought I was going to be able to depend on visual images, but I guess not. We all know the 401. We don't need to see a picture of it. The only thing about this painting is it's a bit retro because I noticed there wasn't a lot of traffic on this 401, and that does not make any sense. I once actually was thinking of putting the 401 in a novel as a character. I am the road that binds Ontario together, but fortunately I rethought that. So yeah, I probably wouldn't be publishing books still if I'd done that. So the 401 is this long, awful road that takes you from point A to point B with there's scenery in between, but it seems to be the same scenery over and over. Even if it's attractive scenery, you think, oh yeah, those hills, yeah, there they are, but you don't retain anything. Either that or you have sort of a long line of really strange office buildings with weird planted trees that reflect in the glass of their whatever. On the other hand, the farmer that walked this road into this village would have known the grassy verge. He would have known, he would know the mud puddles on this road because not only would he have walked this road, so would his father, his grandfather, who knows how many generations. I once lived in a French village like that and made the mistake of asking the people across the road, how long have the Germains been in Flavigny? And they looked at me like, what are you, stark, raving mad? They've been there forever, of course. So there's a kind of intimacy that builds up over that. These trees would be trees that people in that village would know well. And that puts me in mind of the grandfather of the Nobel Prize-winning author José Saramago, Portuguese author. His grandfather, when he knew he was dying, went out to the front yard of his farm where he had been all his life, where his father had been before him, and embraced and said goodbye to each of the 3 trees that he had known since he was born. Okay, next, blur. Actually, that looks pretty good, you know. That kind of improves Versailles, I'd say. Okay, on your right is Versailles on the one hand, and this, could you see it, would be a painting, a 15th century painting called The Paradise Garden by the master of the Paradise Garden. Versailles is another thing. It's another exercise in how you use distance and how one obliterates intimacy in order to establish power. This garden is very beautiful, and yet one feels tremendously insignificant in it, and that's precisely the way you're supposed to feel, because Louis XIV, with the help of his garden designer Lenotre, built that garden in order to establish a complete lack of intimacy. What he wanted was he wanted to be able to see these little speck-like creatures down the main boulevard who were his courtiers and see what they were up to. And on the other hand, he wanted them to feel the great presence that you can't see and you couldn't have seen even if it were in focus, and that is the great palace looming at the end of this, which means I am the king. I have power over all of you, and that is the way it is. Moreover, this is a very controlled landscape. No hedge is allowed to grow a half an inch taller than another hedge. A weed is just not even up for discussion. As a matter of fact, grass isn't even up for discussion. You have to have raked gravel paths. And there's this is a digression, but I can't help it. One of the great stories about Louis XIV was that he could never get all of his fountains to work at once, so he was beheading his engineers with monotonous regularity, because even though they were diverting the rivers of France and they brought at least half of the forests of the Vosges down to Versailles to make bigger trees to encourage water and all this kind of stuff, it still didn't happen. So finally the engineers got smart, and they realized that even the king could not be in his own powerful garden in all places at all times. So they hired a little boy with a whistle, and he preceded the king on the king's morning walk, and he would run ahead and whistle, and they would turn on the fountain, just as the king turned the corner. But anyway, this is a landscape of power. It has nothing to do with intimacy. This, on the other hand, could you see it, is an enclosed medieval garden with flowers and people entertaining themselves and each other, playing music, very intimate space, very beautiful. Virgin Mary is in there, but she doesn't necessarily have to be. And you know, it doesn't have to be about that. On the other hand, having said that it is, it's important to note that each flower means something. The iconography of this painting is such that if there's a lily in this painting, that lily is there for a reason. And to apply that to writing, same thing applies. Again, not only are you intimate with your material, it's excessively important that you know why that particular flower is on that particular page. And this doesn't happen until 2 or 3 drafts later. Again, by that time, you're not only intimate with the landscape, the characters, the narrative, the plot, or whatever. It's one of those things I don't do well, is plot. But you're also intimate with what you have done with the landscape and the narrative and the characters, because you've gone through the manuscript at least 3 or 4 times. Okay, next thing. Now, could you see these two? This has to do with intimacy and distance being created by sort of overkill. These are 2 still lives. The one is quite, I think you can sort of see the Chardin fairly well. The other one is, oh dear, see, this is my art history days. I think his name is Jan van Heem. And I tried to Google him actually. See, I do know something. Before I came in here, with limited success. I got into somebody's genealogy site or something. But whatever the case, I love the title of this. This is called Sumptuous Still Life with Parrot. You can sort of see the parrot there. Now, the interesting thing about that is there's just too much of it. And this can happen also, and this is why we edit our writing. There's just far too much. It's not a bad painting, again. You know, it's okay as sort of overblown still lives go. But it doesn't have the emotional power of the Chardin, which is called the silver goblet, I think, or the golden goblet. Very simple, one goblet, one earthenware bowl, 3 apples, a couple of plums. And again, you know that wherever that bowl lives, those people really know that bowl. They know that spoon, they know the goblet. It might have passed through several generations. You know, just the whole business of becoming intimately involved with the phenomena that surrounds one in a life is something that I think is starting to disappear from our current age. And what I remember too, with a great deal of amusement, is the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in 1971 was very doctrinaire, and they had decided that the art object was dead. And that meant that nobody was permitted to make paintings or drawings. Everything had to be video art. So instead, what people did, finally there was a student uprising because, you know, some of these guys had gone to art college, they wanted a male, you know, they wanted to see a female nude, they wanted to draw the body. So they said, okay, that's fine, you can do that. However, in those days it was video cameras, right? They had to face the monitor, draw the nude, who was in the room behind them from the monitor, otherwise it was too corrupt. Okay, I think it's the last one coming up, isn't it? Yes, okay. Now, for those of you who know, this is the famous Fall of Icarus by Bruegel on the one hand, and a Vermeer on the other, woman reading a letter. The Fall of Icarus by Bruegel has one of the most famous poems in the world written about it by W.H. Auden called the Musée des Beaux-Arts, about suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. And what would be interesting about it, could you see it, is the fact that the subject of the painting is so far away that we really don't even, well, we can't see it in this rendering of it at all. You see a guy with a horse plowing a field. Icarus is these tiny little legs going into the sea. And the point that Bruegel was making, the point that Auden made, was that this kind of tragedy takes place while no one else is looking. This, on the other hand, is a woman reading a letter alone in a very simple room. The letter is open in her hands. You have some clues as to what might be going on. The chair is empty. The map on the wall, could you see it, has a military flavor. She appears to be pregnant, though it could be the fashion of the time, so I can't really say. And this is a terribly intimate moment. So I suppose what I should do is talk about very quickly how this might apply to a work of fiction. Having carried on now about intimacy as long as I have, and knowing that the closely observed world is a world that is absolutely essential for a novel, one also has to know when to pull back. And that's why the Bruegel painting is as successful as it is. And that's also true of fiction. There are moments when you have to, you can't force your reader to be right there every second. There are moments when you have to become a little more general so that when you focus again, the power comes with that focusing. So that's about all I have to say, except that it's a great pleasure to be here and a great honor. And my mother was so impressed when she heard that I'd been invited to, you know, talk to smart people, that I impressed my mother for the first time in my life. So thank you very much.